Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host Eric and this is the show where we are reviewing every movie ever made, starting today with Game Night. This was the recent action comedy starring Mr. Jason Bateman from Arrested Development fame and also Teen Wolf 2 fame. And Rose Byrne, I'm sorry. And Rachel McAdams as a competitive couple who gets together regularly for game nights until one game night quickly spirals out of control thanks to antics from the dad from Friday Night Lights, Kyle Chandler. This is a movie that is fine, I guess. It's somewhat predictable. We have seen this sort of story structure before, wherein there's sort of a series of increasing twists and revelations in a sort of mystery or, nothing is what you think it is sort of format. This one admittedly tries to do it with more of a comedic bent, or at least a dark comedic bent. Now, with that, there are some really terrific moments and sequences in this, particularly those involving Jesse Plemons, who you might remember from Breaking Bad or the second season of TV's Fargo, here playing a police officer neighbor to Bateman and McAdams. Speaking of them, Jason Bateman, I am sort of over, if I'm being completely honest. Since Arrested Development, he has largely been playing that Michael Bluth character in all sorts of things, and I'm just sort of tired of him. Rachel McAdams is pretty good here. I've been enjoying Rachel McAdams a lot more lately, particularly since her turn in the second season of True Detective, which no one else on Earth likes, but I quite liked her in it. And it was nice to see her here, even though the writing doesn't give her, I think, a great deal to do. And that's sort of the big problem with the movie, is that the writing and the cast are somewhat uninspired. There isn't really a great marriage outside of Jesse Plemons. There is not really a great marriage of actor and character at play here, which is, which is what results in this movie being, like I said, fine, I guess. Game Night, 2.5 stars. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, was a movie that just dominated in the year that it came out, which I think was like 2001? No, it had to have been later than that. Maybe more like 2005. What does it matter? If you haven't seen this one, you know about it. It's the first of the big Lord of the Rings movies, the first of the live action. We're going to try and ignore the Ralph Bakshi animated, but the live-action Lord of the Rings trilogy. You've got your Elijah Wood, you've got your Ian McKellen, you've got all of those Orlando Bloom is here. Sean Bean, pre-Game of Thrones. Sean Bean is here, and listen, this is a movie that when it came out, I really loved, and I certainly was enthusiastic to buy. It's a 3-hour movie, and I was enthusiastic to buy the extended cut DVD that was like 4 hours, because you could not get enough. Them little hobbits. Now, in the years since it came out, I have not revisited it in a long time, and my opinion of it has somewhat soured. Not for any particular reason, I think, beyond just sort of its enduring popularity, making it, that kind of, well, I guess everybody likes it, I guess it's not that cool, that kind of a thing. And also just the fact that those Hobbit movies, the new ones, are not that great. So when you watch the Hobbit movies, it almost colors your view of the Lord of the Rings movies. Plus, I do think, in retrospect, those extended editions are a little bit of a mistake. There is, such a thing as too much of a good thing. And when you think about watching a Lord of the Rings movies, 3 hours is already a lot. But to think about, oh my goodness, 4 hours, that's a heap. That is a heap. That said, this first one, Fellowship of the Ring, to my mind was always the better of them. The Return of the King might be the big Oscar winner, but I always found Fellowship to be the most engrossing and in its way somewhat self-contained and easier to watch on its own. So all of that is a very long-winded way of saying that I had not seen this movie in quite some time. So when I sat down to rewatch it recently, very pleasantly surprised. This movie is awesome in that sort of old-fashioned sense of the word. It is awe-inspiring. The level of craft and production at play here is really tremendous, and it makes a movie that is not only exciting and involving, but also just gorgeous to look at. It's also a movie that makes voiceover work. Voiceover is oftentimes sort of a red-headed stepchild in the movie industry, and there are a number of times when voiceover doesn't work at all. And voiceover has become very derided as a sign of lazy screenwriting. Here, though, there's that wonderful opening voiceover that must last for a solid 15 minutes that introduces you to the world of Middle-earth. It's Cate Blanchett in these beautiful measured tones delivering it. And it really is, to my mind, a really memorable part of the movie, a favorite part of the movie for me, even though it is basically a history lesson. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, it's a very easy movie to underestimate, but I think that doing so is a mistake. It is a very gripping movie, whether we're talking about the early scenes of fleeing the Nazgul or that terrific sequence in the mines of Moria fighting the cave troll and then escaping over that bridge with all the arrows flying everywhere, and then that Balrog thing. This really is a terrific movie that I am going to give 4 big stars to. Now let's pull in to the animation station. It is about time that I got around to watching the Peanuts movie. If you know my biography, which why would you? That is a really stupid thing to say. But if you were to know it, you would know that I, as a youth, was a very big fan of Snoopy and the Peanuts. Probably my favorite comic strip for a very long time, up until I got a little older and discovered Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side. But the Peanuts, always a favorite of mine. But a movie that I had not gotten around to watching, in part because the movie what I expected from the movie was that it was going to be the later version of the Peanuts. As the Peanuts went along, Charlie Brown and the gang, and entered into the 80s and the 90s, the strip became very soft and gentle sort of comedy. I personally prefer the early 50s Peanuts where the children could be a little bit more cruel to each other. But this is the later sort of MetLife, Macy's parade sort of Snoopy. And that's what I was afraid of for this movie, and that is indeed what the movie is. It very much captures that feeling of those later years of the strip. And as such, it is fine. It is a very episodic movie, but in a way that makes sense because it's capturing in some way that the episodic nature of the script, that every day is a new comic strip. It is really great looking. I was concerned, certainly when this was announced, that the 3D animation wouldn't fit the Peanuts, but they're sort of able to do a sort of combination of 3D and 2D, where they're using 3D animation but capturing the two-dimensional look of the script and just sort of adding texture to it in a way that is, I think, really wonderful. So yeah, it's a fine movie. If you like the Peanuts, it's worth seeing, but it's certainly not going to be revelatory. It's not in its way, I don't think, any better than the Peanuts movies from the 70s. Your Race for Your Life, Charlie Brown, your Snoopy Come Home, which are also not great movies, but are something. The Peanuts movie, 3 stars. Everybody take cover! It's an action explosion! And as we enter into the action explosion, we are also entering into a subheading of the show, which is movies I saw on a plane. And this week, it is Tomb Raider, not the Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider, the more recent Tomb Raider starring Alicia Vikander as Lara Croft in a Lara Croft origin story more along the lines of what I understand to be the more recent Tomb Raider video and computer games. This is a movie that not a lot of people liked, that certainly got a lambasting from the critics when it came out, and perhaps it is just because I saw it on a plane. But I liked it. I liked it. And the thing I liked the most about it was Alicia Vikander. She is a real action movie heroine in this, bringing in particular a really awesome physicality to the role. There are a lot of scenes of watching her doing things that are difficult with her body, very athletic things. There's an early bike chase. There's a scene where she has to kind of like really pull herself up and move across the skeletal structure of an abandoned plane. There's a lot of stuff like that that's a lot of movement and muscularity that you don't see in movies a lot anymore, and that you never really saw with female stars. And seeing that here and seeing Alicia fit it so well is really entertaining. Those are definitely my favorite parts of the movie, are those parts where the movie decides to get really muscular and physical. The plot, such as it is completely forgettable. It involves her going to an island to find a thing, and who cares? On the island is our bad guy, here played by Walton Goggins. When I heard that Goggins had been cast in this picture as the bad guy, I was very excited. Goggins is, of course, the very southern-flavored, campy actor of things like Vice Principals and The Hateful Eight. And he's always an enormous joy to have in your movie. Here, though, his usual very expressive and very over-the-top nature is very toned down, which is a shame. My big note to the makers of Tomb Raider would be to let Goggins be Goggins and go from there. Otherwise, pretty entertaining. I especially loved the end. The last 2 minutes of this movie, for reasons that I don't know that I can really explain, really spoke to me and really excited me. I have since procured a copy of this film, and I watched those last 2 minutes several times. And those, in and of themselves, much more really even than the parts I liked so much in the rest of the movie, really make me interested in seeing a sequel. If only this movie had had better writing and let Goggins be Goggins, this would be something special. As it is an extremely mediocre movie that is buoyed by Alicia Vikander's performance. 3 stars. It's now time for Calling All Horror Hounds. Okay, Horror Hounds, now believe it or not, we have been doing this show for 65 episodes. Horror Hounds has been a staple of the show for quite some time now, and yet somehow we have not yet discussed one of the greats of the horror genre. Yes, friends, it is time to talk RE-ANIMATOR, the movie that gave us the tremendous Herbert West, as played by Jeffrey Combs, one of the great genre actors, a nutty mad scientist type who uses his neon green serum to bring the dead back to life in a movie that is vaguely based on the work of H.P. Lovecraft. RE-ANIMATOR is a superlative gore fest, a superlative tongue-in-cheek gore fest. This is a movie that blood and viscera flies throughout this thing, and yet it is a movie with an enormous sense of humor that is not campy, is not winking to the camera, but knows what it is and is unafraid to have an hilarious sequence fighting a dead cat in the middle of it. If you've seen the movie, you know what I mean. And I think that you do. Directed by Stuart Gordon, a towering figure in 80s horror. I believe his very first big feature film. Also starring Scream Queen Barbara Crampton in, I think, her first role, and doing a terrific job here. But of course, this whole movie belongs to Jeffrey Combs. And man, does he do a heck of a lot with it here. There's not really a ton to say about it. This is also the movie wherein a professor gets his head cut off, and then West reanimates the head and the body separately, and you have I can show you what it looks like, kind of. I can show you what it looks like, kind of. Hold on. Where you have the body walking around with just the head. That's a pretty good thing. Oh, I'm back to life. But otherwise, stop wondering, folks, why I have a head just off camera where I can get at it and get RE-ANIMATOR going. Watch it again. Watch it for the first time. 4 stars. Now it's time for Docurama. Here in Docurama today, we are going to talk about Freaks and Geeks, the documentary. If you haven't figured out by now, I like documentaries about TV shows and movies and things. This one, of course, about the great, single season wonder Freaks and Geeks, that great TV show produced by Judd Apatow, created in part by Paul Feig, and starring so many people who are a big part of entertainment today. Big early breaks for Seth Rogen, for James Franco, for Jason Segel, for Linda Cardellini, for Sam Levine, Martin Starr, Busy Phillips. It was a terrific show about high school in the 70s and about the dorky kids and kind of the burnouts. It was an amazing show, and so I was excited to watch this documentary about it, but I am also very familiar with this sort of documentary. They tend to be talking head documentaries that tend to overstay their welcome, but the Freaks and Geeks documentary, which the other thing I was worried about it's a documentary about a show that was on for 1 season. How interesting is this going to be? And here's the answer. Very interesting, with lots of solid behind-the-scenes info. It also easily avoids being too talking head and stagey. It is very well produced. It is so well produced that it makes you wonder why they can't get their act together on other similar documentaries. If you enjoyed Freaks and Geeks and you haven't seen it, you're going to want to see this documentary. If you have not seen Freaks and Geeks, watch Freaks and Geeks and then watch this, because it's going to be an exciting companion piece. 4 stars. Now, folks, it is time for nobody's favorite part of the show. This is the worst of the week. This week's worst of the week can only be described as garbage, and that is the Emoji Movie. Listen, folks, I was not excited to see this thing at any point, and my instincts were correct. This movie is awful. It's a ripoff of Wreck-It Ralph and Inside Out. There is nothing original about it. It follows T.J. Miller, who has become, of course, persona non grata, as an emoji who can't figure out what kind of emoji he should be. He's supposed to be a meh emoji, but sometimes he smiles. Oh my goodness. And he has to bumble about in this sort of cyberspace world with other emojis. There's nothing original about this movie. There's nothing exciting about this movie. In fact, it is almost despicably unoriginal. So transparent in its attempts to rip off other more interesting movies and to just pander and to push out some product for kids to eat up and then disappear from the shelves. This thing is an unmitigated disaster. 1.5 stars. And now it's time for the best of the bunch. This week's best of the bunch is Phantom Thread, the latest from Paul Thomas Anderson, reteaming him with his There Will Be Blood collaborator Daniel Day-Lewis. Here, Daniel Day-Lewis plays an enigmatic fashion designer in London in like the 1950s, 1960s. Like many Paul Thomas Anderson movies, this one is absolutely captivating. There's a lot to talk about here. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we try to keep the review short, and we've only got so much time. But I want to highlight a few things. The production design and the costumes are mind-blowing. This is a movie that, beyond just the amazing cinematography, looks gorgeous, as well it should. We are meant to believe that Daniel Day-Lewis is playing a not a genius fashion designer. And so often in movies like this, they go like way over the top with that, and they create these like kind of kooky fashions that we're supposed to be in on the joke of. Here, though, the costuming is sublime and really is gorgeous and befitting. The character's name is Reynolds Woodcock, making Reynolds Woodcock appear to be a fashion designer of the highest quality. Add to that amazing production design so that all of the homes and rooms look just so elegant and lovely. The acting is also phenomenal in this. Daniel Day-Lewis, always great, is creating one of his landmark characters in Reynolds Woodcock. It is another transformative performance from one of the few true chameleon actors. To watch him play this soft-spoken but egotistical fashion designer, and then to watch him play, say, Abraham Lincoln or Bill the Butcher, it's difficult to see him. It's difficult to think that this is the same actor, and he does such a tremendous job here. And the extreme, amazingness, that's terrible. But the wonderfulness of his performance is tempered only by the performance of Vicky Krieps playing Alma, the female lead here, because she is also so good. And it's a tremendous performance. It's a pair of tremendous performances that make each performance greater, but I think also sometimes is fooling to the audience, because then the audience, the acting is at such a high level that you almost become inured to it by the end. The acting is so great that you almost forget how great it is. I don't know, maybe that's a dumb thing to say, but let's get back to Vicky Krieps playing Alma. She is a young woman who comes into Reynolds' orbit, and over the course of time sheds any sort of hesitancy or compliance that she has to become a true match for Reynolds in a movie that I think is all about control. Reynolds Woodcock is somebody who values a very controlled and stable lifestyle that he needs to maintain as specific, and then this Alma comes into his world and disrupts it and begins to figure out how she can exert control over him, and the movie becomes about this push and pull of control in their relationship, and then how they both come to value that conflict. It's a very complex movie and a difficult one, even as I'm talking about, to wrap your head around it. But suffice to say that it is great looking, it is wonderfully acted, it is a movie that is not to be missed. Phantom Thread, 5 stars. All right, well, that is going to do it for this episode of Every Movie Ever. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next time as we keep trying to review every movie ever made.